one time. Go grab the guns. I'll tell you one time. This ain't philosophy. Why?
Hello, hi, good evening, and welcome to the War Room. I'm your host, Sean Pwnery, and I'm actually slightly impressed with myself today, mainly because everything got done on time. We started on time, and the show's prepared correctly for once. I have my cough drops that keep me from sounding like a walking sinus. I've got my white flower oil up my nose to keep my sinuses from being too heinous today. I've got my Colt Python in my lap because I forgot to reach for the anaconda before we started the show today. There will not be a desk pop. There will not be a desk pop. We have reached day 380 of a war that nobody asked for. And I see that we have pretty good chat out there today. So good evening to you, Shady Hill, who is always first, and Bjorn, who is supposed to be actually part of my panel, but he's not here because he has, I don't know, performance anxiety. And there's only one way for you to get over that, sir. You're going to have sex with the queen, or you're going to have sex in front of the queen and on national TV. And if you can do that without breaking character, you can accomplish anything. Follow your dreams. You can reach your goals and live in proof. Anyway. Good evening to Terry Share. Good evening to Gunpowder Beauty. I can't respond to that line about the anaconda because you, madam, are a married woman and I respect the sanctity of marriage. But I have an anaconda. Multiple. Anyway, before I get us into trouble, what did I want to start with? Well, since we're doing sexual innuendos, let me just go ahead and talk about the theme of today's show. Hard. That's right. Hard. Hard-ware choices. Russian hard-ware losses. Springing creations that scream Khyber-pass desperation. Hard evidence found for atrocities abroad. Hard stance posturing on a world stage. Hard living in Chernobyl. And hard decisions being made while a nation continues being laid siege to. The opening stages of the spring offensive in Ukraine have begun. It has become painfully obvious, and the world watches and waits. For what, you might be asking? Well, hopefully, tonight, we should be able to answer that for you, with that question and everything else. Also, today's show is guaranteed to be slightly shorter, because this week, the number of stories out there were very limited in scope. So, we only have about 14 or 15 stories, but many of them are very short, so we'll be able to get through them relatively quickly. And we're going to conclude today with week 2 of our World War III sociological war scenario. So, if you remember last week, the panel was given the opportunity to choose what would happen on the opening stages of World War III that involved every country except Ukraine and Russia. And what would they use? What would they attack? And what do you think the response would be? This week, for week 2, I've really narrowed down the scope because we had let the Allies do the opening foray, and this week we're going to allow the Russian military to respond to basically what we came up with. And by some strange coincidence, we have all collectively agreed that Belarus will be wiped off the map because they're turd burglars and nobody likes them. And every nation we chose decided to attack them because that's what you do to a bully. You squash them. So we'll get into that as well. So to get it started, let me go ahead and pull in my panelists. I'm going to have a late entry later, but I have a Mikhail Neitstraisky and I have a Scott P79. So good evening to the two of you, sir. Sirs. I promise I did not commit chat room adultery earlier. Promise. I promise.
No promises.
I was on my best behavior. So anyway,
No, we weren't.
In keeping with trying to keep the show rolling quickly, let me remind you that the chat scroller at the bottom, the statistics, it is up to date. I did manage to get that right with the day and the numbers and everything, and the sobering statistics of how many troops have been wasted on the battlefield by Russia. And a reminder that the Russian armored division was reinforced. Their tank battalions have been reinforced with 800 T-62 Cold War era tanks. Just for fun, I did a little bit of digging, and I was able.
T-62s are just upgraded T-55s.
T-54s, yeah. Well, I did a little digging, and I found that a very carefully placed Javelin missile could destroy 2, sometimes 3 of those in a single shot. That's how bad they are. By modern standards, they're terrible. But hey, I mean, I made the joke about it weeks or months ago that if it comes down to T-34s and T-42s and T-43s or whatever, they're just basically going to be armored personnel carriers with, a high explosive cannon on the end of it. And in that regard, that's pretty useful. Unfortunately, it's useless against battalions of Ukrainians with thousands of Javelin missiles at the ready. So, we'll see.
And Panthers.
Yes. And the Panzerfaust 3 or Panzerjäger 3s that were donated by the Dutch? You magnificent Dutch bastards. Or Panzer Haubitzes too. So yeah, they're screwed.
And the German tanks that the Polish gave them.
The Leopard 2A6s,
Leopard 2s,
I think they're called. Leopard 2A6 or the Leopard 2Xs. Those things are sick. Oh no, that's what Sweden's giving. I think we covered that last week. Sweden out-Israelied Israel when it came to taking something that they were given and then indigenously modifying it. The Leopard 2Xs are insanely good.
Well, Sweden hasn't been in an actual war since
2.
I don't even think they really even did anything in World War One. They haven't been in an actual war since the 1800s.
No, they were in World War II.
No, they were
Tirpitz was stationed outside of Sweden.
They were neutral.
They were besieged and forced to be neutral so they wouldn't be eradicated at the time.
No.
But I mean, since then, they've had plenty of time to get their eye in, right? Anyway, let's get started before I bore everyone to death. We're going to roll back to last Friday because last week's episode got you up to Friday, but the stories for Friday I was sort of holding off because we had so many last week anyway that I figured you probably had heard enough. So we're going to start Friday, March 3rd, which would have been day 373. And my first story starts with the whole atrocities angle. So here you go. Freshly exhumed remains of three men lie in black body bags on the edge of a small cemetery in a town not far from Ukraine's capital, waiting to be taken to a morgue. None have yet been identified. Ukrainian authorities are still unearthing people who were hastily buried in makeshift graves during Russia's brief but brutal occupation of villages and towns near Kyiv. Almost 200 bodies have remained unidentified, while 280 are still considered and listed as missing. Alexander Pinchuk's mother, Helena, is among them. They never found her body in the wreckage of her apartment building, which took a direct hit from an airstrike 1 year ago. Pinchuk had walked out of the building just 8 hours earlier and has not seen his mother since, he says. On Thursday, Pinchuk stood in the winter chill, grim-faced among a small group of mourners who gathered for a religious service to commemorate the anniversary of the strike in the town of Borodyanka. Just look at what the Russians brought to us and what they did to our beautiful town, said Dmitro Koshka. He's the priest conducting the service at the former site of the residential building. How could we ever forget or forgive? Nothing remains of the structure except the outline of where it once stood. Behind it is another apartment building, blackened and empty, but somehow still standing. Pinchuk said that rescue crews only managed to get to the building last April. After Ukrainian forces retook control of Borodyanka, the crews dug through the rubble for about 2 weeks and located the remains of 15 people. But they found no trace of dozens more believed to have been inside the 108 apartment building. We still have hope for at least some of them, but the rest, they probably just burned alive, he says. His gaze fixed and the pain of loss is visible in his eyes. Without a body to mourn over and bury, the 43-year-old hopes against hope that his mother is still alive. He heard rumors that Russian troops took more than 100 people from Borodyanka to Belarus. Perhaps she was among them. Until the last moment, I will think of her as alive, he says. The exhumation of 3 bodies Thursday from 2 makeshift graves on the edge of Borodyanka cemetery meant that some families may finally have a chance to learn what became of their loved ones. A passerby found the 3 in early of March 2022, when Russia's forces still occupied the town, and he buried the bodies with the help of another man, according to Andriy Nebitov. He's the head of Kyiv's regional police. The passerby then fled the region. He just only recently returned and told authorities about the burials. One of the dead is believed to be a 50-year-old local man who was shot and partially burned in his car, but DNA tests are still awaiting to be confirmed on his identity. Nobody knows who the other 2 are. There's not much to go on to identify them. A green pencil is all that was found on one, packets of cigarettes and key fobs on another. The remains now are so decomposed that identification and determining exactly how they died will require forensic tests. The exhumations bring the number of civilian bodies found in the previously Russian-occupied area of the Kyiv region to 1,373, Nebitov says. Of that number, 197 of them are still yet to be identified. So, this is outside of Kyiv, near the capital. This happened in roughly the opening stages of the war. You may have recalled that we talked about the butcher of Bucha and other, genocidal claims, but there weren't bodies yet to really confirm them. There were just hearsay stories and whatnot. We showed you pictures. They're now finding the bodies. They're now finding people who had buried the bodies out of respect for the dead and then came back to report them because they were too busy fleeing for their lives after they had buried the bodies. I think it's a reasonable thing when you're getting shot at. So this is becoming more and more evident, and the longer this goes on, the more territory is secured. They're going to be able to find the bodies because obviously you're going to see disturbed land, and you're going to be like, why is that ground all messed up like that? Did somebody dig here? And then you're going to start finding bodies, and that's what they're doing. Because realistically, since this war began, 7.5 million people have been physically displaced. They're not all dead, but they're just not where they're supposed to be. So, that's going to be the theme for the years to come is what happened to so-and-so, what happened to this guy, what happened to that guy, what happened to this town. That's what's all coming.
Where's our barley?
Where's our barley? Where's our oats? Where's my fucking MRAP?
Where's
Anyway,
my Humvee?
no, it's an MRAP. It's still in Afghanistan, as far as I'm aware.
I want a Humvee.
It's on Lexani 26-inch rims by now. Anyway, moving on. And we're going to move you on to Serbia, strangely enough. You okay, Scott? All right. Serbia on Friday denied it had exported arms to Ukraine after Moscow demanded to know if its Balkan ally delivered thousands of rockets to Ukraine's fight against Russia's invasion. Never mind the picture that is a Serbian rocket launching vehicle. That is in Ukraine. Serbian Foreign Minister Ivica Dacic said that since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, no weapons have been exported from Serbia to any parties to the, quote, conflict. Never mind the vehicle that I'm showing you in the picture. I can say that because my ministry gives the permission for arms exports, Dacic says, Serbia does not deliver military equipment to any country that we believe would be problematic in any way. Again, never mind the vehicle I'm showing you. Russia on Thursday demanded an official explanation from its ally Serbia about reports that the Balkan country has delivered thousands of rockets to Ukraine, probably because they saw this picture. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman Maria Zakharova expressed deepest concern about the reports, which first came from the pro-government Russian media last month. Yes, this was one of the pictures that was attached to said report. We are following this story, Zakharova said in a statement posted to the Russian Foreign Ministry website last Thursday. She added that the possible arming of Ukraine represented a serious question for Serbian and Russian relations. Good, because a question is going to eventually spring up at the UN. What side are you on anyway? Because you are in the European continent. Choose your answer carefully. The media reports...
This will be on the test.
Yes. The media report said a Serbian state arms factory... We know a Serbian state arms factory, don't we?
We do.
What was it called?
Zastava.
Yes, that's right. Recently delivered some 3,500 missiles for the Grad multiple rocket launchers used by both Ukrainian and Russian armed forces. The 122mm rockets were allegedly transported to Ukraine via Turkey and Slovakia. Serbian Defense Minister Milos Vucevic, I said that right, has denied the country exported the missiles to Ukraine, but left open the possibility that they could have gotten there via a third party, like the Lords of War. If private companies buy weapons in third states' markets and then sell them to other companies in other countries, well, that's not a question for Serbia. That's just international trade, he says. Serbia is Moscow's closest ally in Europe, with historic, religious, and cultural ties that are bolstered by decades of pro-Russian propaganda campaigns in the Balkan country. Russia backs Serbia's claim over its former province of Kosovo, which declared independence in 2008 with Western support. And Serbia has refused to impose sanctions on Moscow over the invasion. Again, whose side are you on anyway? Western officials fear Russia could use simmering tensions in Kosovo to try to destabilize the Balkans and avert some attention from the invasion of Ukraine. This is going to become a problem because Serbia wants to be more European, but they're still clinging on to the nasty ex-girlfriend that used to be Russia, and their loyalties are not... There's no foundation for their loyalty anymore. They're not getting money from them. They're not really getting arms from them anymore, are they? I mean, they're making their own. They're domesticated now. They're building their own arsenal. They're exporting their own weapons because we here are buying them. Zastava Arms. We're buying their stuff. So there's going to come a question where they're going to put Serbia in a corner. And they're going to say, it's time for you to decide. Do you want to be part of Europe? Or do we just, I don't know, draw a black spot where your country used to be, and you'll just be an outlier like Kaliningrad? And then they're going to have to make a very...
Black spot.
they're going to have to make a very tough decision because they too like McDonald's. They too like Starbucks. They do like the taste of capitalism.
They
Are
like
they
their Levi's
willing to
jeans.
lose it? We'll see. I don't know. Like my friend Steve, he's Serbian, but he came to the or he didn't come to the United States. Serbians were originally granted refugee status in Toronto, Canada. That's where his family emigrated to. His father worked for NASA. He has 3 brothers. One's an engineer, one's a doctor, one I think is a lawyer. So they're all successful and useful people to society. I don't think they give a shit about the loyalties to Russia because everything that they have gained, they gained here. Toronto and then here. They also have some of the coolest Volkswagens I've ever seen because they bought them in Canada where the models aren't even available to us in the States. R36s, for instance. Yeah, we don't get those. Anyway, Scott knows a little bit about that because now he has a Volkswagen. A really nice one.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on. Saturday, March 3rd, day 374. See, we're moving on already. We're good. And this is about doggos. Because I love doggos. I love them so much that I have 8 of them in my bedroom right now. And we're about to have 4 more. Anybody want to buy a puppy? Hit me up after the show.
You really need to sell them now.
I have 4 available. Yorkshire Terriers. Cute as a button. Dumb as a fence post. Maybe you can solve that problem. I don't know. Anyway, moving on. We have these. Look at those doggos. They're cute. They need, you know, belly rubs and butt rubbins and back scratchings and to be denuclearized.
Butt sniffing.
Butt sniff. I ain't sniffing no irradiated dog's butt. I'm sorry. I don't want to have a 3rd nostril. I already have a problem with my 2 nostrils. Anyway. More than 35 years after the world's worst nuclear accident, the dogs of Chernobyl roam among decaying abandoned buildings in and around the closed plant, somehow still able to find food, breed, and survive. Scientists hope that studying these dogs can teach humans new tricks about how to live in the harshest, most degraded environments. Oh, so they've been to Chirac. They published the first of what they hope will be many genetic studies on Friday in the journal Science Advances, focusing on 302 free-roaming dogs living in an officially designated exclusion zone. I have to bring Warsaw in. He just got back. Where did I leave him? In an exclusion zone around the disaster site. They identified populations whose differing levels of radiation exposure may have made them genetically distinct from one another and other dogs worldwide. We've had this golden opportunity to lay groundwork for answering a crucial question. How do you survive in a hostile environment like this for 15 generations? Said geneticist Elaine Ostrander of the National Human Genome Research Institute, one of the study's many authors. Fellow author Tim Mousseau, professor of biological sciences at the University of South Carolina, your state, said that the dogs provide an incredible tool to look at the impacts of this kind of setting on mammals overall. Chernobyl's environment is singularly brutal. On April 26, 1986, an explosion and fire at the Ukraine power plant caused radioactive fallout to spew into the atmosphere. 30 workers were killed in the immediate aftermath, while the long-term death toll from radiation poisoning is estimated to eventually number in the thousands. Researchers say most of the dogs they're studying appear to be descendants of pets that residents were forced to leave behind when they evacuated the area. Mousseau has been working in the Chernobyl region since the late 1990s and began collecting blood from dogs around 2017. Some of the dogs live in the power plant, inside it, a dystopian and industrial setting. Others are about 9 to 28 miles away. At first, Ostrander said, they thought the dogs might have been intermingled so much over time that they'd be much the same. But, through DNA, they could readily identify dogs living in areas of high, low, and medium levels of radiation exposure. That was a huge milestone for us, said Ostrander. And what's surprising is, we can even identify the families. There's about 15 uniquely different ones. Now researchers can begin to look for the alterations of the DNA. We can compare them and we can say, okay, what's different? What's changed? What's mutated? What's evolved? What helps you? What hurts you at the DNA level? Ostrander says. We will involve separating the non-consequential DNA changes from the purposeful ones. Scientists said that the research could have had wide applications, providing insights about how animals and humans can live now in the future in regions in the world under continuous environmental assault and in high radiation environments of space. Dr. Carrie Eckenstedt, a veterinarian who teaches at Purdue University, was not involved in the study, but says that it's a first step towards answering important questions about how constant exposure to higher levels of radiation affects larger mammals. For example, she says, it's going to be changing their genomes at a rapid rate. Or is it? Researchers have already started on the follow-up research, which will mean more time with the dogs at the site about 60 miles away from Kyiv. Mousseau says that he and his colleagues were there most recently last October and didn't see any war-related activity. Mousseau says that the team has grown close to some of the dogs, naming one Prancer because she excitedly prance around when she sees people, because she wants to eat them, according to Scott. Even though they're wild, they still very much enjoy human interaction, he says, especially when there's food involved. Well, yeah, you're the food. I mean, listen, super mutants and ghouls and freaking this is how you get death claws, okay? Some of us have played Fallout. This is how you get death claws. This is how you get death claws. But they're still doggos, and we're all doggo people, so we need to like poke them on the snoot and rub their bellies and their butts and give them dog treats. And maybe they'll wag their four tails at us in thanks, right? Anyway, Chernobyl doggos coming to an animal shelter near you. Glowing eyes, optional. Moving on. Sunday, March 15th, day 375. And I'm going to show you this sexy machine. The U.S. military is reportedly evaluating 2 Ukrainian pilots for skills with attack aircraft, including F-16s at an Air Force base in Arizona. The pair of pilots are taking simulator assessments this week, and the U.S. could accept as many as 12 more for the program, according to NBC. U.S. military trainers are reportedly seeking to both expand the pilots' skills and evaluate how long it would take to fully train Ukrainian pilots on the new equipment. The program is about assessing their abilities as pilots so we can better advise them on how to use the capabilities they have and that we have given them, an administration official told the outlet. News of the program comes weeks after Ukrainian officials pleaded with the U.S. and Germany to provide fighter jets for their war effort. Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to Ukrainian President Zelensky, called on the U.S. to supply F-16s in particular. President Biden previously rejected calls to provide F-16s, however, telling reporters in late January that the U.S. would not send any. The U.S. recently committed to sending 60 Bradley armored fighting vehicles and 31 M1 Abrams main battle tanks to Ukraine. The U.S. Defense Department had previously recommended sending the Abrams vehicles, arguing that the German Leopard 2 tanks were better suited to the conflict. Sidebar. Look, you can have these Bradleys, but I think the Leopard 2s would serve you better because they're right around the corner, whereas we have to take them across the ocean and give you Abrams. Trust me, these are better. We just don't want to give you what we got, let's be honest. The U.S. has long resisted sending warplanes to Ukraine, including Soviet-era jets from neighboring nations like Poland, over concerns that it would, quote, escalate the war beyond Ukraine's boundaries. We've all discovered that that's bullshit. While Germany's Leopard 2 tanks will reach the front lines of Ukraine in a matter of weeks, it will take months for Ukrainian troops to be trained on how to use and maintain Abrams tanks. Fact. It'll take months because we don't have any Abrams tanks to give them. That has already been admitted multiple times. We have Indian gave them this. Oh, sure, bro, we'll give you 31 Abrams. Where are we getting them from? I don't know, sir. Well, it might take a while. Sorry. In the meantime, the Germans will take care of it with their Leopards. Right. Moving on. I'll take you into Monday. See how fast we're getting through this today? Isn't it great? Monday, March 6th, day 376. And this is actually piggybacking off the thumbnail today. And that is the translation below it. I typed it in there. So, the fight for Bakhmut has been raging for months, but according to Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, a Russian victory over the Donetsk city would not prove all that strategically advantageous for Moscow. Leave it up to Lloyd Austin to downplay a victory or a defeat. Oh, it doesn't mean that much. Really? Because people died trying to defend it. I think you should probably take some of that back. I think it is more of a symbolic value than it is a strategic and operational value, Austin told reporters from Jordan Monday. The fall of Bakhmut won't necessarily mean that the Russians have changed the tide of this fight. Austin said he would not predict whether Moscow would be able to successfully take Bakhmut, which both the Ukrainian and Russian forces have said has been a brutal fight. What I do see on a daily basis is the Russians continuing to pour in a lot of ill-trained and ill-equipped troops, and those troops were very quickly meeting their demise, Austin says, referring to both Russian military recruits and Wagner forces pulled from the Russian penal system last year. Yes, they're dirty dozen. Ukrainian officials have said that the fight for Bakhmut has been one of the toughest yet as Russia continues to send men to the Donetsk sector despite significant losses. The enemy, regardless of losses, does not stop storming the city of Bakhmut and its surroundings. This came from the General Staff of the Armed Forces on Monday. It is unclear how many soldiers have actually been killed fighting over Bakhmut, which has been all but decimated after more than 4 months of brutal ground and air warfare, with some Ukrainian troops describing it last week as a city on fire. Russia's Wagner mercenary group has led the charge for the city and has attempted to employ similar tactics it used when it took Soledar earlier this year by encircling the town. Oh, hang on. Let me try to drag you back in. Russia's Wagner mercenary group is... I think I read that part. Yeah. Austin also attributed to any Russian progress in the area to the mercenary troops, but suggested the reported divisions between Wagner and the Russian military were increasingly evident when he said, "There are fissures there." I would say that the Wagner forces have been a bit more effective than the Russian ones, he told reporters. Having said that, we have not seen any exemplary performance from Russian forces. Defense officials have long argued that Russia's efforts to take Bakhmut do not hold up strategically with any tactical advantage, and that it would gain in any correlation to the amount of resources that it has thrown at just one sector along Ukrainians' front lines. Just after intense fighting began to kick off in the region, the UK Defense Ministry in early December pointed out that the fight for Bakhmut has already become disproportionately costly for Russia relative to any possible gains it sought. Russia has prioritized Bakhmut as its main offensive effort since August of 2022, the ministry said during an intelligence update. The capture of the town would have limited operational value. There is a realistic possibility that Bakhmut's capture has become primarily just a symbolic and political objective for Russia, and the ministry had been arguing over this point for 3 months. So, I used to have this saying about the concept of mutually assured destruction and why most global superpowers will resist the urge to use nuclear weapons as a last desperate resort simply because there is no point in being the emperor of a ruined world. You don't want to be the king of dust and dead bodies. There's no value in it. There's no glory in it. And there's no history in the books to be written if there's no one left alive to read it. And that's essentially what everyone is talking about with Bakhmut. It has been laid siege to for months. It is nothing but a burned out husk of a city. It is Dresden of Germany, World War II. Burned out buildings, hollowed out everything, and it has no strategic or logistical value anymore. It's just a symbolic fight now, at this point. And that's what they're all pointing out. And they've been debating this for months. And they keep fighting over it for months. And as you'll see in another story, they're still fighting over it.
Can I point something out,
Sure.
Sean?
Go on.
Theoretically, would this be Ukraine's version of Sevastopol? Like, it's Bakhmut is kind of like Sevastopol, like, hey, this is our city, it's our pride?
Not necessarily, because you have to remember, in World War II, Sevastopol was the step-off point for the Russian military to take back Stalingrad.
Mm-hmm.
So that was more of a staging area. Whereas this is a town that they've been trying to take because it's supposed to have some sort of moral victory value. But the problem is they have failed. Because, think about it, August is the 8th month of the year. We're in March, the 3rd month of the next year. They've been trying for 7 months to take this. They're not getting it. And there's nothing left to take anyway. It's a folly, is what it is. It's a strategic folly. They keep throwing the bodies into the meat grinder, and they're not even getting sausage back. It's a waste of space, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of resources. I mean, if you're E. Honda, he's probably saying the whole war is a waste of those things. What the hell does he know? Anyway, I'm sure Ross and his girlfriend Farida just busted out laughing at that comment. I did that for you, man. Anyway, moving on. Tuesday, March 7th. There was no show at 9 o'clock. Just saying. Day 377. And I have this. Basically, what that is that's a Great Lake. No, it's not. It's the North Sea, and Rick farted underwater, and that's what you see in there. Because he's too lazy to make the show. Anyway, that is Rick farting underwater, I'm telling you right now. U.S. officials say new intelligence information suggests that a pro-Ukrainian group was behind the sabotage attack on the Nord Stream pipelines last year, according to the New York Times. The officials told the Times there's no indication that Ukrainian President Zelensky or his top lieutenants were involved in the operation, or that any of those responsible acted in the direction of the Ukrainian government. Mystery has swirled between Washington, London, Kyiv, and Moscow on who might have been responsible for explosions along the pipelines designed to carry Russian gas to Germany under the Baltic Sea. The multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects have long been condemned by the West as national security threats in allowing Moscow to sell gas more easily to Europe. Asked whether there are indications that a pro-Ukrainian group sabotaged the Nord Stream pipelines last summer, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby, former Navy admiral by the way, told reporters Tuesday several of our European partners, in fact all three of them, Germany, Sweden, and Denmark, have already opened investigations into what happened with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And those investigations are not closed. They're still hard at work on that. So, I'm not going to get ahead of that investigative work, and I would have to refer you to each of those European countries to comment on their investigations. According to the Times, a review of the newly collected intelligence indicated that the perpetrators were likely opponents of Russian President Vladimir Putin. You don't say. But does not specify the numbers of the group or who directed or paid for the operation. U.S. officials who reviewed the intelligence have said that there are no firm conclusions about the attack, leaving open the possibility that the operation might have been conducted off the books by a proxy force with connections to the Ukrainian government or its security forces. Tuesday's development comes after the White House last month dismissed a blog post from U.S. investigative journalist Seymour Hersh claiming that President Biden had directed the attack. President Biden can't even direct an attack outside of his own toilet bowl. Anyway, the White House National Security Council, CIA, and State Department also asserted that the post was utterly false and complete fiction, according to Reuters. I will have you know, they already have released some of these, quote, investigations by our European partners, and one of the more interesting things they found was shipping manifests and GPS logs of commercial ships and military ships that had passed through that spot in the ocean in the Baltic. And you know, something really funny came up. 4 ships, only 4 ships passed that area at the time that this happened. One of them was Russian. One of them was the only ship that turned off its transponder as it crossed this spot. It was Russian. Now, do we suggest that the Ukrainians stole a Russian boat and did this? Or the Dutch did it? Or the Germans did it? Or is it more likely that the Russians did it to stir some shit up?
You're saying this is possible sabotage, you're saying, Sean?
No, it's not possible. It's absolutely sabotage. Somebody blew up the pipe.
No, but I'm saying by its own nation. I think that the Russian Navy went out and stole like a ship and then just decided, hey, let's just put a bomb on our own pipeline.
Well, that's the thing. See, there's a report that it was a Russian military vessel, and there's one that is a report that it's a Russian cargo vessel that is used as a spy ship. And I think we actually showed pictures of the questioned spy ship several weeks ago on this very show.
So this is a possible coup within the Russian Navy, possibly?
I don't think it's an actual Navy operation. The risk of being caught and executed for treason is way too high. But
this is a small coup.
Yeah, if it's like just revolutionaries doing it, that seems feasible. If it's Baltic states stealing a Russian boat and turning the transponder off, that's feasible, improbable, but feasible. And there's so many questions, but there's 3 nations investigating this, including us, and fingers are pointed everywhere, right? So it's like one group says that Biden ordered it, which there's no proof of that because there's no records of any American vessels in the area, right?
Well, they were thinking it was Navy SEALs. I'm like, that's possible, but we never did that.
That would still require a vessel that would have been picked up on a transponder, at least
correct,
somewhere in the vicinity of the area before they turned it off, right?
Yep.
But they have the naval registry records of the area for days before and days after. They know what ships crossed through there. They also know which ships' transponders were off because they had a signal. Oh, they turned it off. Day later, it turned back on, but it wasn't in the area anymore.
I mean, we
fart bubble in the water. I wonder what happened.
What do you think, Nice Trick? Because I can't really think of anything.
Neither can I.
I mean, it's until we know for sure, everyone's going to guess just like I am.
I mean, it's got to be possible Russian sabotage. That's the only thing I can think of.
There's nothing better to build your case for your country being screwed with than to shit in your own pool and blame someone else.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's fair to say that, right?
Right.
But then again, there's the saying, he who smelt it, dealt it. So,
it's true.
And that is one gigantic Rick fart bubble underneath that water. I mean, that... He's got a big ass. That's a big bubble. I'm just saying.
Poor Rick.
I know. I don't think they make a cork big enough for that hole. Anyway.
Not even a volcano could fix that.
I'm just being harsh, but he's too lazy to get off his ass and defend himself, so fuck him. Anyway. Moving on. I want to show you an American trader, actually. A fat-cheeked, pale, pasty little fuck who will probably be charged with something. Treason, hopefully. And we all know what the standard punishment for that is, don't we? Remember this guy? Yeah. Retired. Probably forcibly retired. Lieutenant Colonel, Baby Bird, Alexander Vindman. Remember that name? Who made waves as a witness during the first impeachment proceedings of former President Donald Trump, is now being accused of profiteering off of the war in Ukraine by pitching lucrative defense contracts through his own private company. Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, who is one of the sharpest critics of Vindman throughout the impeachment investigation, blasted him as an opportunist and accused him of undertaking continuous efforts to try to personally profit from his attacks against Trump and his administration to his reported dealings in Ukraine. The first impeachment of Trump centered around a July 2019 call in which Trump pressed Ukrainian President Zelensky to launch investigations into the Biden family's actions and business dealings in Ukraine, specifically Hunter Biden's ventures with Ukrainian natural gas firm Burisma Holdings. The president's request came after millions in U.S. military aid to Ukraine was frozen, which Democrats and some witnesses, including Vindman, cited as a quid pro quo arrangement. When conservatives speak the truth, the mainstream media panics and desperately attempts to provide cover for the left. They did this for Alexander Vindman, just like they did for Hunter Biden, Dr. Fauci, and teachers' unions, Blackburn says, referencing liberal media outlets' staunch defense of Vindman throughout his time as a witness during the impeachment investigation. Alexander Vindman has always been a political activist and opportunist, masquerading behind his career. He saw an opening for personal fame and profited by exploiting the media's outrage against President Trump, she's accused. Vindman has spent the last 3 years on MSNBC and CNN attacking Republicans. Now, new revelations suggest Vindman could be profiting off the war in Ukraine, just as he did by speaking out against the Trump administration, Blackburn added. According to the report by Human Events, a conservative digital newspaper, Vindman has been pitching the government of Ukraine to obtain defense contracts through Trident International LLC, of which he is the CEO. The report stated that last year, Vindman, who was born in Ukraine, that I did not know, pitched a project worth $12 million that his company would address the country's problems with managing the readiness, repair, and maintenance of its weapon systems by developing a center within the country to essentially operate as a middleman between NATO and the Ukrainian military. The center would reportedly operate in such a way that equipment and weapons could be repaired in closer proximity to the front line and cut down on the time it takes for transpiration and maintenance. It's unclear, however, if the project had ever been approved, as the report stated in court documents showed there was an ongoing dispute over payments related to the project. According to Breitbart, Vindman appeared to confirm Human Events reports in a now-deleted tweet. Thanks for the advert. I'm trying to get logistics in place to help Ukraine win the war and secure America. Looking for philanthropic contributions to get it going. Reach out if you support the cause of democracy and U.S. national security, Vindman allegedly tweeted. Vindman responded to the accusations by blasting... Yeah, allegedly. Vindman responded to the accusations by blasting Blackburn, accusing her of lying and contributing to him ultimately leaving the military. Oh, Blackburn, she's an idiot, an agent of chaos promoting disinformation. She has never said one true thing about me. Her attacks in 2019 and 20 contributed to an environment that made it impossible for me to continue my nonpartisan military service, Vindman says. More importantly, it's the politicization of Ukraine by the fringe right that brought about this war, imperiling Ukraine, Europe, and most importantly, the U.S., he added. He said that. He said that it's our fault that Ukraine is under attack. That we brought about this war.
All right, sorry to ask, but who said this?
Alexander Vindman.
Who is that exactly?
Have you not been paying attention?
No, I'm paying attention. Just remind me again who this is.
He is the impeachment narc of Donald Trump. He
Oh,
is the
Jesus Christ.
CEO of Trident International LLC. He is a discredited, forcibly retired lieutenant colonel.
Yes, I remember watching
And now
a video
he's
on
accused of being a profiteer, trying to broker deals through his own personal company in an effort to say, I'm going to help the Ukrainians with logistics between NATO and the U.S. government. You can't do that because you're not part of the U.S. government anymore. And
But by the way, I've been on a good authority that
Mhm.
he's also a registered Democrat.
Pretty sure he is. I mean, he's blaming us for dragging them into a war. He was trying to get President Trump impeached, and he has spent the last year being a color commentator on PMS, NBC, and CNN. I mean, if it looks like a duck.
I'm guessing he's on the spectrum of far left wing.
I don't know. He's on the wing that's trying to make money before he's shot for being a traitor. Anyway, the next
Trident
story.
LLC, is that like, that Trident importation group?
No, I think that's somebody else.
Okay, because I knew that was a bunch of ex-military spooky guys
This guy's trying to do.
that were shady as fuck.
Well, he's trying to do logistics contracts for maintenance and repair of equipment on site. So, I mean, if what he's saying is true and what he's actually trying to promote is legit, it's not a bad idea. But if you consider the source and his history and his bias to administrations and the media and whatever, like, how much of him can you actually believe, right? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, next story I have is actually going to be a little bit fun because I found this on a satire site, but it turns out to be very true, and Mike loves it. So we're going to do this one. You're going to look at this picture and you're going to go, what in the absolute fuck is that? Vladimir Putin's battlefield efforts have become desperate as the warmonger has been forced to build Frankenstein tanks with aging naval cannons welded on top. That is not a Photoshop, I promise you. Russia's failed campaign in Ukraine has seen its military already lose more than 1,700 tanks. It's probably more than that if you look at the scroller at the bottom, but we'll go with this. And its dwindling army stockpile has meant that the Kremlin has been forced to improvise. Images have emerged of the crudely engineered vehicles being deployed in Ukraine. Footage from an undisclosed location appeared to show a 25mm 2M3 twin-barreled naval anti-aircraft turret fitted to a Soviet-era MTLB amphibious fighting vehicle. The bizarre contraption is believed to be built with machinery parts from 1945. Its guns were likely taken from a naval patrol boat, while its tracks could date back to the 1950s. The Frankenstein tanks are believed to be an improvised response to the Kremlin's shortage of essential war material. Ukrainian forces have also destroyed large numbers of Russian tanks through the use of drones, which Putin has been unable to replace. Videos obtained by The Sun online showed Russian tanks being obliterated in the Donbass region. Justin Crump, an intelligence and geopolitical risk analyst, told The Telegraph he believed Russia was forced to use a naval turret because its sea fleet still had a surplus in gear. He said, I suspect it was improvised from naval turrets as they had access to them and the relevant ammunition. Hamish de Breton Gordon, a former British tank commander, said he witnessed similar vehicles adapted by Islamic State fighters in the Middle East. He said the fact that a supposed First World Army is cobbling together different bits of kit, not dissimilar to terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, hopefully shows the perilous state of the Russian army. His claims follow Putin suffering one of his worst defeats since the start of the war in Ukraine. During the Battle of Vuhledar, it was estimated Russia was losing up to 300 soldiers a day and left behind more than 100 military vehicles in total ruins. The Britain's Ministry of Defense echoed the sentiment and confirmed Russia has taken more than 800 old T-62 tanks out of deep storage in response to its heavy losses of armor. The MOD spokesman said, "There's a realistic possibility that even units of the 1st Guards Tank Army, supposedly Russia's premier tank force, will now be re-equipped with T-62s from the Cold War to make up for its previous losses." Russians have also created, quote, Mad Max vehicles with bolted-on improvised armor as they cower in the face of British anti-tank missiles on the battlefield. Ships in its sea fleet have also been fitted with bizarre air defense modifications. They have put land-based surface-to-air missiles on ships. They lash them down with chains because they don't have enough on the sea anymore. This is what defeat looks like, bro. Remember that quote? Anybody remember that quote? This is what defeat looks like, bro. This is it. Zero Dark 30. Not expect anybody. None of you do that. Anyway. Yeah, Franken-tanks, Khyber-pass specials. But I want to raise a point here.
All right. Now I'm awake for this one.
Okay, I want to raise a point here. There's nothing wrong with this, truly, because once upon a time, the British were facing annihilation. They came across engineering questions that they didn't have answers for, and from that sprang what was known as Hobart's funnies. Some of you know what that is. Some of you may need an explanation. If you Google Hobart's funnies, you will see what I'm talking about. They had to answer the questions such as, how do we get a Churchill battle tank to cross that expanse with a rut in it, or a trench dug in it? So they came up with this vehicle that had this giant bale of twine stuck on top of it, and when they got to said trench, they yanked on a rope, and the big wad of twine would roll off the front of the tank and fall into the hole, and then they could drive the tank right over the trench. They also had what they called canal defense light tanks, because they needed something to light up surprise attacks on coastal batteries, or from coastal batteries.
Like armored bulldozers.
Exactly. These were questions
Israelis still use.
Yeah, and these were answers to questions on the battlefield ad hoc, because these questions were never asked before, because they never ran into this situation before. Now,
and they even put a plow on a Churchill.
Yes, and they also had one called the AVRE, which had a 290 millimeter spigot mortar, which they called the Flying Dustbin. What they would do is they would drive this really goofy looking Churchill tank that was powered by 2 bus engines, and then they would hit a concrete fortification, and this thing had a turret with a gun. It looked like a gun, but it looked like it just got out of the swimming pool, if you guys know what I'm talking about. And the barrel of this thing was so big and so goofy that the Germans thought it was a fake. And then they were even more shocked when the hatch for the driver popped open, and the driver would stick his hand up and load the gun from the front of the barrel, because they didn't have any way of loading it from inside the tank. It would have to turn 90 degrees so he could load it, and then they would turn it 90 degrees and fire it. That's how crude it was. But you know what? It worked. It took out bunkers, it took out tank traps, it took out dragon's teeth, and Hobart's funnies actually got results. Now, what you're seeing in this photo here, this is a little bit of Russian desperation mixed with a little bit of, well, we've got these things in inventory, let's use them. So they took like a shitty little BMP and they put a Russian naval cannon on it. And you know what's funny? Would you want to be on the opposite end of one of those firing at you? No. We're all gun related people here. And we make fun of guns sometimes. Like, for instance, the Beretta Minx, right? It's a 22 short, little tiny pistol. I have the Jetfire, which is a 25 version. And
The
yeah,
high point.
in the grand scheme of, well, it's kind of pathetic, isn't it?
Yeah.
We all agree on one thing. I wouldn't want to be on the other end of that thing.
No.
No, getting shot
no,
is
but-
not fun.
No, but can I point out something about this thing?
Yeah.
Looks like a goddamn cockroach.
It's
I-
what
I-
you got. It's using what you got.
I'd
I'm
like
just
to
saying,
point-
it looks like a cockroach.
I'd like to point out the most important part of the picture that everybody's ignoring.
Go on.
Look at the welder at the front.
Oh yeah.
Oh my
because-
goodness.
Because they have
So-
to weld that to the tank.
But the problem is they're not using a proper welder for that. They're just using whatever they got lying around.
No,
Oh
no,
yeah.
they got the proper thing. If anybody is welding the high treated steel plates, they got to use a stick welder, and
An arc
they got to
welder,
use a
yeah.
certain rod.
But the
They got
thing
to use a
is
certain rod.
this is what happens when you're desperate to get something on the battlefield.
And this just shows it.
This thing can roll out, fire one shot, and all the welds that they just put down crack, and that turret just falls over
And
like Humpty Dumpty.
That's what I'm getting at. That's
Yeah.
what I was about to say.
But you know what? That's what desperation springs, doesn't it? Innovation.
So pretty much at this point, the Russians are repeating the Chinese.
It's Khyber-pass. That's what it is.
No, I believe it's Vladivostok Pass.
This is close to being Chinese in my book.
Well, if it works, if a Ukrainian soldier is killed by that monstrosity, then it worked. And you can't make fun of it if it works. It's only crazy it's only crazy until it works.
I bet a
I'm
javelin missile
I'm
would
gonna
blow
bet
it.
it's gonna take one or two RPGs, and it's gonna be done and over with.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, right? You get a column of T-62s or T-62 tanks. They have
I'm pretty sure you could take that thing out with an RPG-7.
Yes. They
Yeah.
have crude steel armor. They don't have spaced armor. They don't have like Zimmerit like the Germans had. It's just a steel box. It'll stop small arms fire, sure, right? But in a combat column, a javelin that lands in between two of them will destroy both of them because it's powerful enough to do that. And the armor is weak enough on a T-62 that it can't withstand it. So it's like,
Right.
you have 800 of them, but realistically speaking, the Ukrainians only have to fire about 250 javelins to destroy 800 tanks. That's hilarious. It's like Duck Hunt. Anyway, that'd be funny, actually. Moving on. Franken-Tank was funny. I'm glad you forced me to put that
Yes.
in there. All right, so we're going back to Bakhmut. See? And it's Wednesday, March 8th, day 378. So we're getting there. We're pushing through. Swedish underwear model? No. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg on Wednesday said that the hard-fought city of Bakhmut in Ukraine's Donetsk region may fall to Russian troops in the coming days. His comments
Okay.
followed claims by Russia's mercenary Wagner group, which said that it had taken part the eastern part of the city after months of brutal ground and air offensives. The group's claims could not be independently verified, and Stoltenberg did not confirm whether any part of the city has actually yet fallen to Moscow. Russia's war of aggression grinds on against Ukraine, he told reporters ahead of an EU meeting with defense ministers. We have seen fierce fighting in and around Bakhmut, and what we see is that Russia is storming in more troops, more forces, and what Russia lacks in quality, they will try to make up in quantity. I think we talked about that earlier today in the chat. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin echoed sentiments long expressed by Western defense officials earlier this week when he said Russia stands to gain little strategically by taking the devastated city of Bakhmut, noting that the fight has become largely symbolic. Despite the heavy losses Russia has suffered, Moscow has continued to funnel in ill-equipped, ill-trained troops to bombard Ukrainian defenses in an attempt to choke the city. Stoltenberg reiterated Austin's comments, but warned it signifies the continued threat Russia poses. This does not necessarily reflect any turning point of the war, he said before adding, it just highlights that we should not underestimate Russia. The NATO chief said that it is vital to step up the production and supply of arms not only to Ukraine, but to shore up the alliance defenses. This was clear all the last fall, he said in reference to Ukraine's success in retaking the Kharkiv region in September before then ousting Russia's forces from the city of Kherson in November. Major advances in the war from either side have largely stalled in the months since, though officials are gearing up for another round of intense warfare on multiple fronts as the spring months loom. There is an enormous demand out there. The current rate of consumption compared to the current rate of production of ammunition is not sustainable, Stoltenberg told reporters. We need to ramp up production. Welcome to the U.S. fucking ammo shortage, asshole. Several NATO nations have increased their arms supplies to Ukraine and pledged to allot more defensive funding to the alliance, but Stoltenberg said that more is needed to successfully fight against foreign aggression. We have seen important steps already being taken, but we need to do more. Our support to Ukraine has mainly come from depleting NATO stocks, he explained. In the long run, that's not sustainable. Well, duh. Moving on to Thursday. See, we're almost done. How about that? And I have this kind of picture, which I thought was pretty cool, actually. Russia launched a major missile barrage on Ukraine early Thursday morning, striking dozens of residential buildings, leaving at least 6 people dead and compromising a major nuclear plant. With a Y. The attack included more than 80 missiles and 8 drones striking targets across Ukraine, including the capital city of Kyiv. It was the largest of the attacks in recent weeks. Ukraine's chief commander of the armed forces, Valery Zaluzhny, said that 36 missiles had been intercepted and half of the drones were shot down. Last night, Russia attacked Ukraine with 81 missiles and 81 Shahed drones. 34 cruise missiles and 4 drones were shot down by Ukraine's air defense. 8 Russian missiles missed their targets. As a result of the attack, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, previously conquered by Russian troops, lost power again, according to the nuclear state operator Energoatom. According to Energoatom, the nuclear plant relies on 18 diesel generators, which run the station for 10 days. This is the 6th time the plant has suffered a blackout after it became occupied by Russian troops months ago. The Zaporizhia plant has been subject to international concern as a potential explosion or meltdown could result in unprecedented destruction to the surrounding areas. The countdown has begun, Energoatom says. Lviv Governor Maxim Kozitsky said 5 people were killed in the Lviv region and 3 buildings were destroyed. The number of fatalities could climb as rescue workers are continuing to comb through the rubble. Dnipropetrovsk Governor Serhiy Lysiak said that a 6th person was killed and 2 others were wounded in multiple strikes across the region. Odessa Governor Maxim Marchenko also said that residential buildings were hit and several power lines were damaged. In addition, at least 6 missiles and 1 drone were shot down. Kharkiv Governor Ole Syniehubov said 15 missiles struck residential buildings, but there were no casualties. 3 power stations owned by private electricity operator DTEK were also reportedly struck during the attack. Again, there were no casualties, but the equipment was severely damaged. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said 3 people were wounded in the city's, oh my god, I've never seen that one before, Sviatoshinsky district, and infrastructure and the vehicles in the city were also destroyed. If Farida is actually listening right now in the chat, you can tell me if I'm slaughtering the pronunciations. I can take the criticism. We woke up from the explosion. It was very loud and we saw the cars burning, said Marina Kudiluk, a 49-year-old resident. An alarm remained in Kyiv overnight and into the early morning hours. It was lifted just before 8 a.m. Russia's missile barrage came as its forces advanced into Ukraine's Bakhmut, where two sides have fought for over 6 months. Much of the city has been destroyed or reduced to ash. The attack also came as UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres visited Kyiv for talks with Ukrainian President Zelensky on keeping Ukrainian shipping ports open to ship grain from its Black Sea ports. Well, they only have Odessa left, so yeah. Ukrainian Energy Minister Herman Halushenko condemned the missile strikes as another barbaric, massive attack on the energy infrastructure of Ukraine, mentioning on social media that facilities in Kyiv, Mykolaiv, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, and Zhytomyr regions have been targeted. Russia has been hitting Ukraine with these massive missile strikes since last October. The last barrage took place on February 16th. Allegedly. Moving on. And I'm going to take you to Lviv. Ukrainian President Zelensky is decrying that the Russian military's pathetic tactics Thursday after Putin's forces launched that Zelensky
Which
described...
FYI is near the Polish border, by the way.
Lviv?
Yes.
So it's very far west.
Yes.
All right. Thursday, after Putin's forces launched what Zelensky described as a massive missile attack across the country, targeting the capital city and 10 other areas. The attacks, which hit residential buildings and infrastructure, including knocking out power at the troubled Zaporizhia nuclear plant, have also left, so far, at least 6 dead, report says. The enemy launched 81 rockets, trying to intimidate Ukrainians again, returning to their pathetic tactics, Zelensky wrote on Facebook, describing the barrage as a rough night. Occupiers can only terrorize civilians, Zelensky added. That's all they're capable of, but it won't help them. Responsibility for everything committed will not pass them. The Ukrainian military officials said 34 Russian rockets and 4 of 8 exploding drones were intercepted, according to the AP. Russia's defense ministry said that the missiles were launched in retaliation for an incident near the Ukraine-Russia border last week, in which Moscow alleged Ukrainian saboteurs crossed into the Bryansk region and started opening fire on villagers, killing 2 civilians. They saw a civilian vehicle with civilians, with children in it, and they fired on them, Russian President Vladimir Putin was quoted by the AP as saying, though Ukraine has denied responsibility. No, we didn't do it. That's what that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Ukrainian President Minister Dmytro Kuleba said Thursday that the overnight missile attacks had no military objective for Putin and were just more Russian barbarisms on full display.
I believe that one.
Yeah. The day will come when Putin and his associates are held accountable by special tribunal, Kuleba tweeted. The AP reports that the strikes have caused severe damage at 3 Ukrainian power stations, knocked out heating for half of Kyiv's population, and left Kharkiv, the country's second largest city, without running water and other basic needs. The attacks also severed power at the Russian-occupied Zaporizhia power plant in southern Ukraine, leading International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Grossi to warn the IAEA's Board of Governors that one day its luck will run out. Yet again, Zaporizhia's nuclear power plant is running on emergency diesels. It's the last line of defense. This is the 6th time. Let me repeat that. The 6th time that the ZNPP has lost all off-site power and has had to operate in this emergency mode, Grossi said Thursday. Let me remind you, this is the largest power station in all of Europe. What the hell are we doing? How can we sit here in this room this morning and allow this to happen, he added. This cannot go on. We are the IAEA. We are meant to take care of nuclear safety. Each time we are rolling the dice, he says, and if we allow this to continue time after time, then one day our luck will run out. It's about time you found your balls, dude. But you're still not going to do shit about it because you're not a military man. You are a nuclear egghead. Moving on. And I have a picture of a marked man right there. Ready for this?
Nope.
Moldova Remember that country
Oh,
that's
no,
too
not
poor to
that.
fight back? Moldova's breakaway region of Transnistria, which has close ties to Moscow and hosts Russian troops, claimed Thursday that it had thwarted an assassination attempt on its president, allegedly organized by Ukraine's National Security Service. Transnistria's state security ministry said an unspecified number of people had been arrested in connection with an attempted attack on the region's president, Vadim Krasnozelsky, and other officials. Prosecutor Anatoly Goretsky said that the suspects planned to detonate an explosives-packed automobile near the presidential cortege as it traveled through the capital, Tiraspol. When's the last time we heard something about a vehicle being ambushed? Oh, that's right, Franz Ferdinand. Anyway, and he was shot with a 32, I think. Anyway, it is said that Ukraine's SBU security service ordered the assassination attempt, but did not provide a shred of evidence to the conjecture. The SBU rejected the allegation, saying it should be considered exclusively as a provocation orchestrated by the Kremlin. A separatist war broke out in 1990 in Transnistria, a strip of land with about 470,000 residents that borders Ukraine. As a part of the ceasefire in 1992, a contingent of Russian troops remains there as nominal peacekeepers, or FSB occupiers if you ask me. Anyway, since Russia sent troops into Ukraine more than a year ago, concerns have been high that Moscow would try to take control of Transnistria. But Russia's defense ministry has claimed in recent weeks that Ukraine has designs on Transnistria, either through mounting a false flag attack that could be blamed on Russia or by sending in its own troops. Moldova's pro-Western government said it was following developments but could not confirm the attempted assassination claim. They haven't even interviewed the target. Why is that? Like, hey bro, someone just tried to take you out. How does that make you feel? I don't know, but I'm going to Disney World. No, you're not. Actually, they might. I mean, that's where the woke go, right?
Right.
And the child molesters. Yeah, something like that.
I'm not sure.
The diddlers. Anyway, moving on. Here you go. Like, Warsaw should love this picture. Officials in Poland and Slovakia are urging their allies to provide fighter jets to Ukraine, saying that they are ready to send all of their Soviet-made MiG-29 jet fighters to Kyiv as part of an international coalition. Wow! It's been a year, and they're saying the exact same thing they did last year, isn't it? However, it still remains unclear if any other Western supporters of Ukraine are ready to take that step. I think it's time to make a decision. People in Ukraine are dying. You don't say. We can really help them, Slovak Defense Minister Jaroslav Nad said Thursday. This is inhumane and irresponsible. Well, where the hell were you a year ago? Slovak and Polish officials have made the calls before, but have renewed their appeals in recent days. Both countries are NATO members. Polish President Andrzej Duda said Wednesday on CNN that Poland was ready to provide Ukraine with all of its MiG-29 fighters in coalition with other countries. Nad said that it was also a matter of discussion between himself and his Polish counterpart at a meeting in Sweden on Wednesday that they agree on the matter. Poland's defense ministry said in a statement emailed to the AP that Poland is ready to hand over our MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine as part of the international coalition. Ukraine has been asking the West for fighter jets to beef up its defenses as the war drags on into its second year. While Kyiv has obtained promises of tanks, some of which are already arriving, there are still no signs that larger nations like the US and Britain will agree to send their warplanes. Well, yes, but let's be honest. If you take them out of a MiG and you put them in an F-16, it's going to be different, which is why they have to be trained up on these things first. But we're working on that too. I don't know why we just don't give them a flight of A-10s, honestly. Like, that would do a lot of damage.
I'll
Like,
believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I see
I'd
this.
love to see it.
I'm
Anyway,
just shaking my head right now.
moving on. My dog's having a nightmare.
Also, can I point out one thing before we head out to the next section?
I already hit the picture, but go on. Go ahead.
Like I said, all right. What I was going to say is these MiGs are actually Poland's pride and joy. It'd be kind of like a defeat if they actually gave them off.
Yes, but the thing about Poland's military arsenal is it's rather unique. They have everything. They literally have everything. They have every single piece of hardware from all the NATO allies.
Yep.
They have every battle tank.
What about Hungary, though?
Hang on. I gotta see what my dog is doing.
Nope, I heard him yelling.
Wake up. You're having a nightmare. You sound like a freaking dripping faucet. Like she makes this noise, like dripping water.
What?
I woke her up.
Oh.
She was really freaked out. All right, let's move on to the drone story. The U.S. Treasury Department announced new sanctions Thursday on a China-based network that sells aerospace components to Iran for manufacturing drones. The Iran Aircraft Manufacturing Industrial Company, wow, that's a real creative name, manufactures the Shahed 136 drones and exports them to Russia, which has increasingly used them to bombard Ukraine in recent months. Iran is directly implicated in the Ukrainian civilian casualties that result from Russia's use of Iranian UAVs in Ukraine. This came from Brian Nelson, Treasury Department's Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence. The United States will continue to target global Iranian procurement networks that supply Russia with deadly UAVs for use in its illegal war in Ukraine. 5 Chinese companies and 1 individual were sanctioned for sending thousands of aerospace components to Iran, or Iran, depending on how you pronounce it. Iranian drones have been used by Russia to strike Ukrainian civilian structures and critical infrastructure. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan warned earlier this year that Iran could potentially be contributing to widespread war crimes by supplying Russia with drones to bombard Ukraine's civilian population. Their weapons are being used to kill civilians in Ukraine and try to plunge cities into cold and darkness, Sullivan said back in January. U.S. officials have even accused Iran of sending personnel to Crimea to train Russian troops on how to pilot the drones. They can lie to the world, but they certainly can't hide the facts, and the fact is this: Tehran is now directly engaged on the ground, National Security spokesman John Kirby said last fall. You know, you can lie to the world, but you certainly can't hide the facts. And the fact is this: the world is directly engaged in this war, on the ground and in the air. Like, see how easy that was for me to bend that into the narrative that we probably already knew? Anyway, moving on. Got one last story for you, and then we're going to play our little war game. Friday today, March 10th, day 380. We've made it, folks, and it's not even 2 hours. How about that? When U.S. officials at the U.S.-Mexico border stamped the Ukrainian passports of Maria and her daughter last April and gave them permission to stay for a year, she figured she would return home within only a few months. Now, with that year almost up and the war that caused them to flee is still raging, their permission to stay in the U.S., known as humanitarian parole, is expected to expire on April 23rd. The word worry doesn't even capture what I'm feeling, says Maria, who spoke through an interpreter and asked that only her first name be used over concerns that speaking publicly could potentially hurt their immigration case. This is something that frightens me, mainly because of my daughter and her future. The 46-year-old woman and her daughter, now 13, are among 20,000 Ukrainians in a similar situation, according to resettlement agencies. Most arrived to the United States at its southern border after fleeing to Mexico, where it was easier and faster to get a visa to enter the country in the first months following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Maria's parole is tied to her work permit, enabling her to earn a living as a nanny, and makes her eligible for food stamps and other public assistances. Her husband flew to the U.S. to join them in July and received humanitarian parole for 2 years. The Biden administration said that it is working on a fix, but so far has issued no official guidance on what Ukrainians should do, according to advocates helping the Ukrainians. The Department of Homeland Security did not respond to requests for comment. I want to take a slight sidebar to this. That part that I just read. The Biden administration said it is working on a fix, but so far has officially or issued no official guidance on what Ukrainians should do. The Department of Homeland Security did not respond to requests for comment as well. Do you know why? It's because this is the depth of a liberal's attention span. Because they don't do anything based in logic. They do everything based in emotion. Fickle emotion of the moment. So they thought, oh, don't worry. We'll just let you come here. We'll protect you. And the system that they employed has a contracted dateline to keep the system from being abused. But they didn't think about that. They just thought, we're going to look good because we brought you over here. Now they're running out of time. The reason that they don't have a response, because they never fucking thought about what to do after they got here. They were just like, we're going to look good, we're bringing them here. Well, yeah, but now what are you going to do? Because now they have to go home. By your own rules of your own program. Oh, we didn't think about that. We'll have to get back to you. We'll circle back on that one. Really? Maybe. That's basically what they're doing. Because they're idiots. Anyway. Where did I leave off? Ah, yes. Jewish Federations of Northern America, which provides support for the agency that helped Maria's family get settled, is among the organizations that have written to the Biden administration to quickly renew humanitarian paroles for Ukrainians. Krish Omara Vignaraja, the CEO of Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, said people are scrambling to figure out what to do. One option would be to apply for asylum, but a war doesn't necessarily qualify someone for that. Even short-term solutions like individual parole extensions are unclear since there's no uniform guidance, which leads to delays and confusion, she says. Some Ukrainians have considered returning to the U.S. border crossings, where they entered to ask for an extension, but that leaves the decision up to the port director, Omara Vignaraja said. Sorry, that's a really complicated name. It can also be expensive to travel and requires time off of work, advocates said. Some have been told by officials to write across the top of the government's parole form, re-parole, since there is no option to check for an extension, according to advocates. So they created a program, but they don't even have a renewal program set up for it. There's not even a blank, so they just have to write something on top of it in magic marker. Because they didn't think about how to prepare the program or the forms, because they're idiots. Right. Anyway, I don't know why my freaking Windows keeps bugging me about stupid shit right now. Let's see. It just really highlights how ad hoc this process is, Omara Vignaraja said. See, I got it right that time. These requests often go unanswered or are transferred to different agencies, and because there's no clear process on how to handle them, sometimes they're just simply denied. The government turned to humanitarian parole as a quick fix to deal with the fallout from many world crises that have occurred as the U.S. refugee system that was dismantled by the previous administration was being built back up. Now numerous groups are facing their permission to remain in the U.S. expiring in the coming months, including tens of thousands of Afghans. Humanitarian parole was never meant to be over-relied on, at the expense of refugee resettlement or asylum protection, said Meredith Owen of the Church World Service. Lilia Lukianchuk, a Ukrainian mother of 4, has applied for asylum with the help of Lutheran Social Services, but she and her husband have never gotten an answer. Their parole expires on April 16th, and it is tied to her husband's mechanic job in Jacksonville, Florida, where they live. She fears that if they're sent back, her 17-year-old son will end up on the front lines as a soldier. Of course, I'm worried because the worst-case scenario would be to be returned to Ukraine, but I have to be strong for my family, she said through an interpreter. Maria and her daughter arrived at the U.S.-Mexico border after trying to settle in 4 different countries first. The lines at Poland's borders were too long. In Hungary, they could find a hotel room for only 1 night at a time, and were told by locals that the government was not in favor of hosting Ukrainians. They went on to Belgium, where many Ukrainians were arriving, but the local school had no room for her daughter. Then in Spain, they were told that it would be difficult to find work in an apartment. That's when Maria decided to go to the United States and was told Mexico was the best way. Do you know what that sounds like to me? Have any of you seen the old series The Winds of War? And War and Remembrance? It had Robert Mitchum in it. It was one of his last major acting roles before he had passed away. It was an entire chronicle of the Second World War as told by an American Jew and her Jewish uncle who lived in Poland. And it was an epic. It was like the Iliad and the Odyssey. It was them trying to get away from Nazi Germany in the middle of a war while being Jewish. It sort of ended badly for everyone. But it was them going from country to city to boat to whatever to try to get out. It was incredible for its time. If you've never seen it, it's Herman Wouk's The Winds of War. And the sequel was called War and Remembrance. And it will leave an impression on you, especially when you find out what happens to the uncle. It's shocking. It's, for a 1980s series, the effects are it'll shock you. It really will. Like, they were pretty graphic. It was really well done. It left an impression on me. Anyway, moving on. Jewish Family Services of Greenwich helped her find a job, enroll her daughter in school, and get settled in Greenwich, Connecticut. Maria said that only recently did she and her daughter start feeling hopeful about rebuilding their lives. To be honest, the first 5 months, my eyes to that were closed. My primary goal was just to make sure that my child was okay, to calm her down and reassure that she was safe. Tania Priyatka of Jewish Family Services said Maria's family is working with a lawyer who would advise them to wait for guidance from the government. If that doesn't happen soon, they plan to go to the nearest airport and ask Customs and Border Protection officials there for help. For now, Maria tries to stay hopeful and struggles to keep her daughter, but struggles when her daughter asks what will happen. I feel lost, kind of hopeless, she says. Her voice was shaking as she grew emotional. As a mother, I should be able to give my child an answer that she will be well and that she'll be safe. But she doesn't have one. Okay, so that's the stories I have for you this week. Now we're going to get into something a little more entertaining. Last week, I provided what I called the World War III war game. So let me put the picture up for you. And for my panelists who are now muted, this is the time where hopefully you've had time to look at the criteria that I had laid out. And that way we can sort of get straight into this. Because this is one of those segments that we can mull over a bit, but it really shouldn't take us that long. Because, I mean, this is just us postulating and guessing, right?
And I'm going to piss you off by saying this.
What?
I'm dropping out.
What?
I'm falling asleep, dude.
Well, you're going to go first then.
All right, so
wait, I got to lay it out.
Lay it out then. Hurry.
So last week,
going out fast.
Last week we had all collectively, in our own way, we picked our different nations and what we thought was going to happen, And we all concluded that Belarus was going to get smashed because they were probably going to push into Ukraine to help the Russians because that was their northern ingress point. And that would give, in my estimation, that would give Poland the excuse to start smashing in Belarusian skulls to force the Belarusians to turn around and go back home to defend their own country and not help the Russians. And we all came up with certain scenarios, but at the end of the day, boots to ass, Belarus takes a loss. Russians are now without a northern flank. So, the rules that I had laid out for this week was simple. It was, today is going to be, you have to decide what the Russian response to that is. What are they going to do? Where are they going to do it? And then what do you think the NATO response to that will be? So since you're getting sleepy, because you got to get your CPs, you can go first, Mike.
I am literally falling asleep. Okay.
Go ahead.
I've been up for hours. All right.
Oh my God, it's almost like you had a job or something.
Shut it.
Yeah.
It's just not used to having to do it every day like the rest of us.
No, I'm not.
Go
just
ahead.
being human
Give
being.
us a nation like Russia. What's Russia gonna do?
All right. So last week, on this World War,
Yes.
I chose Lithuania
Yes.
because they're not their capital isn't far from Minsk for Belarus. So
Yes.
Belarus out of the picture, you've got those northern NATO nations by themselves, but at the same time, most of Russia's forces is still in Ukraine.
Yes.
Even if Belarus is X'd off the map, that doesn't help Moscow whatsoever because all of their forces are committed in Ukraine. They would have to send whatever reserve forces, to the borders of Belarus in order to prevent any NATO forces from
Spilling
going
out.
further from entering Russian territory.
Okay, I'm with you. Oh, let me just point out since you chose the nation, for those of you who aren't aware, it's right here above these three explosions on this map. This blue area here where these arrows coming down, that's essentially where where he's talking about.
Yeah, because of the satellite nations in Eastern Europe, the northernmost satellite nations from the old Soviet era, like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania,
Mm-hmm.
they're NATO nations for now.
Yes.
Just FYI, in case no one knew.
All right. So what are the
Anyway.
Russians going to do?
The Russians are going to beef up the border with where Belarus was. Okay, just because the Belarus has been taken out of the picture
Yes.
does not mean that it does not give Russia the ability to just go in and just take everything over because no.
Because now there's a NATO occupying force in Belarus.
Exactly. And
So you're saying they're
now-
going to shore up a defensive wall there.
yeah, I would believe that if Belarus was taken out of the picture
Mm-hmm.
like that, the NATO forces would beef up the borders. The
Mhm.
Russians would send reservists to said borders,
Mm-hmm.
like they did with Ukraine. And the NATO forces that are inside Belarus will be going towards Ukraine, and if they decide just depending on the situation, they may decide to intervene and go into Ukraine. Granted, they probably only do so with the approval of Zelensky.
Okay,
They
so I want to
wouldn't
ask
just-
you a question. This is only week 2 of this conflict, okay?
Yeah.
So are you working off the assumption that the NATO forces were able to completely render Belarus out of the battle? Like, that they were able to do it in a week?
I honestly believe they would be because
Okay.
Belarus does not seem to be have the capacity to that. No one's feeding them weapons like everybody else is feeding Ukraine.
Sure. What I was curious is because Belarus is actually quite large, but The reason that most of us chose this attack, at least the way I chose this attack, was because if Belarus moved into Ukraine up from the north, right, that would give Russia a breather because now they don't have to commit forces into the north part of Ukraine because he's got Belarus doing it for him, so he could focus more on his push on the east, right?
And if
The attack on Belarus was just to force that attacking force to turn around and run back home for their own defense. So it took
Exactly.
away Russia's northern pincher
and
attack.
with that also you have to realize that with that out of the picture,
Yeah.
the Russians can't go after any more nuclear facilities and dig around Chernobyl and try and build more.
Well, they're done with that though.
Yeah.
Like they gave that up way back in like May.
Yeah. They can't attack any more nuclear facilities without repercussions because they'd have to send all those troops, but they got radiation poisoning back to Russia. instead
Right,
of
but
sending it to Belarus.
they've been rocket and missile attacking Zaporizhia, which is in the
Yeah.
southwest of the country, way far away from Belarus. It's in
Right.
the eastern flank.
But
That's
with
the
this
biggest nuclear plant in all of Europe right now.
with this situation, though, you also have to look at you showed an excellent point with Chechnya.
Okay.
Okay, now what's to say if Belarus is taken down?
Mhm.
What's to say someone finally gets to Kadyrov?
He's already been poisoned. He's
already been
currently sort of down right now.
He's sort of down right now. What if he dies?
If he dies, I think you and I talked about this before we went on air. I think you're going to end up with another Libya situation where there's a power vacuum. Because right now
No,
you've got
you're not-
three factions. You've got
No,
the
no, no.
pro-Russian side, the pro-Ukrainian side, and then you've got the just leave us the fuck
It's
alone
not
side.
the Libya situation. It's what you're going to run into with the whole Chechen situation is you're going to go back to like the late 90s, early 2000s, the Chechen wars. You remember those?
Yes, but see, the thing is when you take out
You're gonna have a-
Kadyrov,
You're going to have a Chechen civil war.
that's what happened in Libya after Gaddafi died.
Yeah.
You
So-
had this power vacuum, and you had these different warring factions trying to like take over. And so that's what you got. You got three sides, and if the guy that was holding everyone at bay dies, then his third is now sort of without a leader. The other third is empowered by the fact that, hey, he's gone. Maybe we can take him out now. And then the third that didn't give a shit is like, if you cross into my yard, I will turn your head into a canoe. I told you to leave me alone. So that would make for a very interesting power vacuum.
So with Russia communing all their forces to said they're already in Ukraine. Okay,
Yes.
all the forces they can spend anywhere are in Ukraine. Currently.
Okay.
Like if Belarus is taken out, then they have to move their reserve forces to beef up the borders where Belarus was. Okay.
Okay.
There's just no chance of them being able to move reserve forces anywhere else
Right.
because they just don't have the men right now.
I'm
And
glad
that-
you came up with this because I
And-
actually have something that
and
complements
anybody
what
that
you're saying.
tries and they try to they've tried to draft people, and
Sure.
you realize that all these people are like leaving to Mongolia and other places because they don't want to be
No.
drafted.
Oh, no. The biggest area of draftees came out of Mongolia.
Really?
Yeah, they're disproportionately drafting Mongolians. Like, they're pissed. They're like, why all of us?
Well, there's people that are leaving Russia because they
Yes.
don't want to be drafted.
Of course. Like, nobody
So-
likes drafts. Except
So,
sports people.
The situation would be, Russia will have to dig in because
More than they already are.
more than they already are because they're at this point, if Belarus is taken out of the picture,
Yeah.
they have one less ally.
Yes.
We all know China's not going to do anything because
We
China's eyeing
don't
Taiwan.
know that.
No, well, the problem is, look at where China is and where
Yes.
Chinese forces are. Okay, and look
Okay.
at where Russia is fighting.
Yeah.
You think Russia's going to let China just waltz right into Russia and send a whole long column line all the way over to the eastern Ukraine to help them out.
They don't have to.
Nice strike. That's where you could be wrong in that.
Well, this is his scenario. You can have yours in a minute, but
Yeah.
You know,
So
the thing is they don't have to, Mike. They can simply airlift them there.
well,
that's what I was thinking.
Possibly.
Yeah, you got to remember that's a
there's
nation
also-
of almost 2 billion people.
There's also the situation that the Chinese, even though they are technically on the Russian side,
Yes.
they're looking at this saying the big Soviet bear ain't the Soviet bear anymore.
Yeah, you know, we've been saying that for almost a year, right? But right
Right.
now they're still bros.
Yeah, they're still bros, but they're not. But if you notice, China isn't doing anything other than saying no in the UN because it doesn't cost them anything.
Okay, well, let me pose this question to you. Do you think right now that China still thinks that they're second fiddle to Russia, or do you think that Xi Jinping is starting to feel like, man, we were allies with this guy, but I think even we can take him out now?
I think the Soviet Party of China right now, or not the Soviet, the Communist Party of China right now,
Uh-huh.
believes that they, well,
That
because
they're about to
they-
take the lead in this?
because the Chinese or most Asians are racist. They
don't
already believe that they're superior to any other country or any other race, no matter
Well,
what.
yes, but I mean, that's what I'm curious is, do you
But-
think they're ready to take the lead in this as the head of the Axis?
But in this situation, I think that the Chinese believe that they are better than Russia because Russia's proven that they can't beat
Okay.
a smaller nation than them.
No, I'm okay with that. Yeah.
And here is the last part of the scenario.
Sure.
Okay, because of that, I don't believe China is going to send forces to help out Russia. They're not going to say do anything detrimental to Russia.
Yep.
But they may just decide to go and follow their own interests and go into Taiwan.
Okay, listen. I am so glad I let you go first because we did not script this. But okay, I'm going to do mine next because mine piggybacks off of yours, sort of. It fills in all the blanks.
Okay,
So that was a
you
great
go on.
scenario.
Let me go back into my coma. Okay,
All right, you go into your coma. You might want to hear this part though, because mine's
I'll
pretty
I'll
short.
stay to listen.
All right, so this is what I came up with. Week 2. Russia is going to plan a massive counterattack after losing Belarus as its only northern ally. By striking the entire length of the Finnish border. I bet you didn't expect that.
Oh God, you're going with the Winter War again.
Not really. A NATO hopeful to establish a new northern wall, giving them access to the air bases and naval passages to the Balkans. Okay? This is in an effort to choke off all supplies to Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, the 3 Baltic countries that you mentioned earlier. So what I'm saying is they're going to go in above the Balkans and then set up.
There's a problem with this.
Well, maybe. Follow me here.
Lithuania and Poland share a border,
Yes, but
so supplies can be trucked in via those avenues.
it's a tough traverse though because you have Kaliningrad and you have Belarus still there. I don't think anyone
still
going
have
into
them
Belarus.
there, yes.
I don't think
but
anything going into Belarus is going to completely take it over.
What I'm saying is the border, both countries meet.
Sure, I'm not saying discounting that, but see, hear me out here. You set up a northern wall in Finland, right? You start fucking with Finland, and you start crushing their idea that they could be a NATO ally, right? You take that away from them. You choke off supplies to Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, just like the Germans tried to do with their U-boat campaign in Great Britain 80 years earlier. Remember how they tried to set up a blockade? Now, you're right, there's a land route, but there's only so much you can do on a land route that's not exposed to air cover. And if you have airstrikes coming out of southern Finland across a very short expanse of the sea, you can hit those. And if you're choking out the Balkans, then what ends up happening is If the other three nations, the Balkan states, give in to Russian demands because they're starving to death, their foothold in the north gives them back an avenue into Kyiv. However, pushing through Belarus and liberating it adds a whole new problem into Putin's already diminished forces, like you were saying.
The problem is, where are they going to find all those forces? Because
Well,
all those forces are already dug in eastern Ukraine, fighting off the
yes.
Ukrainian army.
So the question is asked, does Putin go on another massive conscription campaign to create occupying forces? Or, like you were saying, is this a segue that China and North Korea need to get more involved by committing troops into the European Theater of War effort, the ETO? And the way that they would do that, since you brought up the land campaign, is airlifts. Because China completely surrounds Mongolia, right? And the northwestern part of China goes right into Russia. The northeastern part of China goes right into Russia. North Korea goes right into Russia. There are rail networks that can get them there, but that might not be fast enough. But
Well,
the one thing that the Soviet or the Russians haven't done yet is committed anything from the east. Like Vladivostok and the Pacific Fleet and all that stuff, he hasn't touched that yet. He still has all the assets of his eastern half of the nation that he hasn't even mobilized yet. So technically, he could airlift them in there. The Chinese have their own cargo aircraft too.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, what you're forgetting is, Armenia and Azerbaijan are having problems relation-wise right now.
Sure.
Okay, they're having relation-wise problems. The stands, they're not doing so hot either with each other. Okay?
Yes, but
'Cause
see, you're
there's a
bringing in an
drought over there.
element. You're bringing in an element in the center underbelly of the Soviet.
What I'm trying
Empire.
to get at is, those guys aren't. They're part of CSTO,
Yeah.
but they are not. They haven't been reabsorbed.
Right,
like-
and they're
like-
also non-committal to
Soviet
any of this conflict either.
Exactly.
So
And-
like I'm not this is part of my counterattack, right?
right.
I'm not putting that factor in there. That could be week 3 for all we know. I'm just
Well-
saying that if I had to be Russia and I had to respond to what just happened in Belarus and I'm Putin and I'm like, "Damn, I just lost my northern ingress," then I need to make a new ingress, right? Because I've got everything sort of bottlenecked and tied up in the east, in Kyiv in like Zaporizhia and Donetsk and Luhansk and all that in the east.
Uh-huh.
Like you said, we're all kind of tied up there, right? So that's not going forward or backward. It's just kind of stuck. So you leave it, and you have to build yourself a northern wall. Well, if you think about how Norway, Finland, and Sweden are arranged, the very end of those 3 nations, there's a big piece of Russia that's still on that landmass. There's a 730-mile common border with Finland. Finland's getting nervous. They're building a wall right now because apparently walls work, regardless of what any idiot Democrat in this country says. Walls apparently fucking work. So they're doing that.
Just ask those in Berlin.
Yeah. Well, that's the point, right? So Russia sees this fence and wall starting to get built, and they're like, hey, wait a minute. What if we pushed in there right now while they're still building this because they're unorganized right now?
And
And
I want to
we
know
bowl
where
them
those
over.
forces would come from, because they don't have the forces. They're stretched too thin to have the
Think
forces
of the
to do that.
population size of Russia.
I know, but think of the people
They
that
only
are saying
have
no.
300,000 troops committed in a nation that has probably 750 million people. It's not hard to come up with the numbers. Now, I'm not saying they're quality troops or anything of that, like far from it, right? They're just, like you would say, they're throwing bodies at the problem. We call it Russians doing Russian things, right?
The
They can
problem
conscript
is
500,000 people
the
overnight
kind
if they
of
wanted to.
armament they would use to attack Finland would be, as we've been joking, they'd have to go back to T-34s.
You know what? And that's probably what they would do. T-54s, T-62s, T-43s, whatever it
I got
takes.
news for you. Finland's got better equipment than that.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And so do the Swedes. But that's what a desperate warring nation is going to do, right? I mean, we saw the Franken-tanks, right? Now, that's just based on the theory of a land assault. They still have Kinzhal missiles. They still have Su-57 felons. They still have the Su-31s. They still have the White Swan. They can bombard through the air if they wanted to. They can try to test Finland's air defenses. There's different ways to ingress here. And we're forgetting something. The Kola Peninsula. They still have the Northern Fleet. They can hit it with ballistic missiles. Like, I'm just talking about pure offensive, shock and awe, crush Finland early and quick before they're a full NATO ally, so there's no Article 5 shit yet. And Finland just says, hey, stop fucking shooting at us. You can use our airfields, okay? Just leave us alone and stop breaking the dishes. If they can do a decisive attack like that, just to get Finland to stay neutral, then they have an ingress in the north again. If they can put a naval blockade on the Balkans, then those three NATO nations aren't technically being attacked. They're just not letting any ships in to supply them. And they're going to be like, yo, we're getting hungry. And then the Russians will be like, well, if you want to eat, then you need to let us occupy.
And here's where I say you're wrong.
Without a shot being fired.
Because the spirit of Simo Haya will
that
ignite.
Is some fairy tale bullshit, man.
Will ignite in the Finnish people, and
Jesus
they will say no.
Christ. Okay.
You know I'm right.
You know it makes it for an interesting thing, but that's why this is my scenario. I'm piggybacking off of yours because I was shocked. Like when you said all this stuff, I'm like, oh cool. Everything he's laying out, I've already got things to fill in the holes. So they sort of work together.
I just want to have my rebuttal, all right?
Yeah, I know, but none of this is actually going to happen. We're just playing the feasibility game, right? So it's like, okay, let's just say that happens. Let's just say that the Balkans surrender peacefully, saying, look, we got to eat, let the ships come back in and feed us, and we'll stay neutral. Okay? We're NATO, but we'll stay neutral. You can't put troops here, but we're not going to stop you from moving ships in front of us, whatever, right? Because we got to eat. If they do something like that, they have a new northern ingress. That's my week 2 proposal. I didn't say it was feasible or likely or whatever. It's just I had to pick something. I thought I'd pick something a bit outlandish because nobody thought about Finland today. I guarantee you, when I laid out this thing, none of y'all thought about that shit. So anyway, that's mine. Yours was good. I piggybacked off of yours sort of, and I think there's some parallels to be made there. We both agree that China and North Korea still, we're not sure what they're going to do yet, but at least I gave a possibility. I'm not saying that they're going to do it, but whatever. And you gave a pretty good possibility of, well, maybe China's ready to think that they're going to take the lead. They're going to put the big boy britches on. That would really piss off Putin. But then again, he might be desperate and just be like, okay, I'll let you play along and think you're in charge, and then one day I'll stab you in the back. Because that could happen too, right? Because that's Russians doing Russian things. Yeah, exactly. Lukashenko and that fucking memo saying that Belarus was going to be taken over administratively in the next 7 years. Like, I'd still love to hear what that motherfucker has to say about that. Like, hey, did you see that thing that came out of the Kremlin? How does that make you feel? Like, have Dr. Phil ask him that. How does that make you feel? That'd be fucking hilarious. Okay, so those are our scenarios. Scott, do you want to go next, or do you want to let Warsaw go next? Did he fall asleep?
He might have fallen asleep like I was.
Son of a bitch.
Falling asleep.
All right, Warsaw, then give us your scenario, because you already know the criteria. You've had time to study it and look at it. Where do you think Russia's going to attack? Why? And what do you think the counterattack will be, or the response?
I'd say, like we were just mentioning, Finland is like a strategic advantage. And maybe Poland. The problem is if they attack Poland, then it's automatically World War III. The Poles do not want to spark off a war if they can avoid it. But what I do see is possibly, let's see, all right, so we got Biden, we got Putin. If Biden is still going to keep giving aid, then Putin's going to go, all right, Mr. Biden, stop fucking giving Ukraine aid, or I'm gonna fucking go as a his fit, and we're gonna call up a fucking avalanche on your foot of your aiding and abetting of Ukraine. And Biden's probably gonna be like, fuck you, we're gonna keep aiding and abetting the Ukrainians, whether you like it or not. And Putin's gonna probably, all right, you know what, fuck you, I'm gonna make a call to somebody I know.
This is the
You know what,
back
but-
and forth of escalation that we kept being told was going to happen anyway for the
But
last year and a half.
I think it's gonna get worse though. Can I explain?
Sure, it's just I was hoping you could pick a. This is we're in our second week of this, right? I know you weren't here for the first one. What I'm
Yeah.
curious is, you're laying
I
out the
w-
table. I get that, but where do
Yeah,
you
I was
think
coming at
they
the
would
country.
strike?
I'm getting to that. Can I explain going on?
Go ahead.
I think Putin will call fucking Xi Jinping.
Okay.
And I think he's going to call the Chinese army and get airlifted all the way to Moscow.
Okay.
And I think he might even call the Chinese Navy to actually come up to the North Fleet to where Finland is, because Finland has a naval port. So- Many naval ports.
But the problem is for okay, let me work with that for a second. Okay, if they send land forces as far as Moscow, are you employing the Chinese PLA as an occupying force, a backfilling force, or are you going to make them go and push into the front lines?
Push in the front lines and assist the Russian army.
Okay,
And
where?
It'd be all force in Ukraine through Belarus.
Okay, so you're going to have them push. Well, no, Belarus is gone. Remember, last week we took
Yeah.
them out. They're
Yeah, no, but I'm saying
non-factor.
they're still going to go through it though if it's gone regardless.
So you're saying that they're going to try to have a renewed combined arms front to try to take back Belarus?
Pretty much, it'd be like
Okay.
it'd be like the Korean War, but pretty much like the Chinese army back up in the north.
Okay, I'm with you then. I'm with you on that. Now, the Navy angle that you've got. It's an interesting proposal, but there's a problem. If you want the
And that is-
Chinese Navy to take it to occupy Finnish ports, right? To do that, if they went around the top of Russia to do that, there's no port for Finland up there because the Russians own the Kola Peninsula already. They
All right.
own that part of the northern parts of the sea, right?
Or-
they would have to go all the way around Norway, Finland, and Sweden, and they would have to go through the Strait of Denmark. They'd have to squeak past Germany, and then go up into Finland through
Or
the Balkans, right
and another
past
theory.
Poland.
And I had another theory too.
Okay, because I don't think the Navy's going to make it that far.
What about the Red Sea?
Okay, so if you take the Chinese from the south, they would
Because
have to
they've
go.
gone through there.
Well, okay, they would have to go through like the Indonesian, Polynesian island chains, right? There's a lot of shallow sea mounts and things like that. It can be maneuvered. They would have to cross through the Indian Ocean, which would piss off India. They would
In
have to
Pakistan.
go. They would have to go into the Persian Gulf, which has a lot of NATO nations in it. They're not going to tolerate that. And then if they got to the Red Sea to take the Suez Canal, no one's going to let them go through the Suez Canal because that would be they would not allow warships of a warring nation to enter a neutral port. First of all, they'd be like, no, you can't do that. So they couldn't take the Red Sea. And even if they took it and went into the Med, Turkey already blockaded the port that enters into the Black Sea, which means they can't go through there either.
The Black Sea. That's what I'm thinking. Not the
Yeah,
Red Sea.
they
Black
can't
Sea.
go in there. See, that's the one thing that Turkey is pivotal in all of this. Turkey are the gatekeepers of the Black Sea. They're not letting anybody in or out because they control that port. That's their role in this. What they have
Even
done,
if it was a Chinese sub.
yes. They are not. Nobody is allowed in or out of the Black Sea. That's why the Black Sea fleet of the Russian Navy has become completely neutered. They will leave Crimea. They will either take it up into the Sea of Azov, or they're going to try to squeak past somehow to get back to the Caspian, and that's it. They can only retreat. They can't go forward because they can't get out of the Black Sea. They're stuck. They're landlocked. So the Chinese can't get in, the Russians can't get out. The Americans can't get in or out, and the Ukrainians can't get out. So the Black Sea is just basically a kiddie wading pool at this point. It's got some serious firepower in there, but they can't get out. Nobody's coming in, nobody's getting out.
But as far as the land-ground forces, I think theoretically China could actually be assisting the Russians by actually going through Belarus as a hard front.
I don't disagree with you. I think that you can mix combined arms with Russian advisors and some troops backed with PLA.
Maybe some Koreans too, North Koreans maybe.
Yes, but the problem is the logistics, right? So yeah, you're gonna have to airlift them. You can't bring them into Moscow. It's too far away. The staging area. There's a town, just on the other side of the Kerch Bridge or whatever they call it. That was a staging area for Russia before they pushed into the east of Ukraine.
A dumb question. What about Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan? Think they could cross that?
So the problem with the stands, and I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm glad Mike brought it up, because they're not a non-factor totally, but they are in a region that's sort of away from all of this, right? Because you've got the Middle East, and you've got Iran and Iraq, and you've got
Syria.
You've got the Caspian Sea. That's a sea wall, or like there's like a western wall from the stands to actually get straight there. They'd have to cross the Caspian. And that's the Russian soft underbelly of their empire right now.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, yeah, they're not reabsorbed. They're sort of bickering amongst themselves, but they're not poking at the Russian bear. So it's like, unless you're going to assume that they're going to pick a fight with Russia right now, they're probably not gonna, which means that's like a dead man's land. Nobody's doing anything down there or coming up from there, because they're not going to let the Chinese in, because that would sort of be an act of war.
Right, all right. How
force
about
them to be involved?
All right. How about if Russia says you would open door or we would kill you with nuke?
They won't have to. That's the whole point. If you airlift the Chinese where you need them, and you stage them on the eastern flank right across that Kerch Bridge, I think it's called, then they can simply go from Russia straight into Ukraine. Now, if you wanted them to go from Russia into Belarus after we have sort of neutered Belarus, then the question becomes, are you going to fight to take Belarus back? Now, that's a valid thing, right? We took it last week. They're trying to take it back this week. That's feasible.
I forgot about that. What is that little territory that's in between Lithuania and Belarus? God damn it! What is it?
Are you talking about Kaliningrad?
Kaliningrad. Yes.
The problem is Kaliningrad's more of Poland's than anyone else's.
It's like in between Poland and Lithuania.
Yeah, but it literally juts into Poland. Like, if all of this ends, and they talk about war reparations, honestly, I would think that the UN or NATO or both, as a punishment to Russia, would force them to give Kaliningrad back to the Poles as reparations, because the Polish have very graciously taken in almost 4 million displaced Ukrainians. Like, they deserve something out of all of this, right? Why not give them back their territory? Yes. That's very reasonable. And that's very feasible.
And it wasn't theirs to begin with. It was captured by the drone.
Correct. So it's like, fuck you, you're not getting that anymore. You lose that. That's your punishment. You should have never had it. Now you're not getting it back. And now the Poles are going to have it. And if Lithuania is like, hey, can we have some of that? Okay, split it amongst yourselves. But as long as the Russians don't have it, we don't care. Right? I think the Poles would be accommodating to that. They'd be like, okay, you can have half of it. We'll take the other half. As long as the Russians don't have it, whatever. Right? I'm sure there is an amicable negotiation there. Because nobody's saying, hey, that's ours. They're not doing that. And it's a petty fight to have right now in the grand scheme of things. Now, I'm assuming that you're pushing this, we're going to take back Belarus if we're Russia, with the help of China and North Korea.
If the Chinese army and the PLA actually assists the Moscow front, and that's why I think...
valid. That's valid. Somebody had to do it, because I went blockade route, Mike went sort of the same type of thing, and then you
I
want to take
mean,
back Belarus. Okay,
no.
cool.
Here's the question. Two things. How much is left of the Russian army?
Of now,
Just now in Moscow's hands right now.
assuming the numbers are correct that are in the theater of war now, it's about 300,000.
All right, and how much does the PLA and the Chinese army have right now?
They're a nation of 2 billion people.
Okay, so imagine if you just took a portion of that, 1/3 of that.
If
That's just enough for them to invade.
if the Chinese conscripted 10% of their total population, that's 200 million infantry.
That shit's scary right there, just thinking about it.
We talked about this before, like when we were talking about China versus the United States. China can amass an infantry the size of our entire population and still have 4 times that number in reserve.
Yep.
That's their strength, numbers. We used to think that the Russians had strength in numbers. Could you imagine what a war between Russia and China would look like? Better
You'd be
yet,
sad.
imagine what a war between India and China would look like, because India has about 1.5 billion.
The problem with India, they don't even have the advanced weaponry they have.
Are you sure? Because they built some
Apart
pretty
from the class,
sick. They are building a pretty sweet navy right now. They really are. Like you cannot undervalue India. They're what you're calling they're what you would call today by modern standards an emerging superpower. They really are. They're really getting their shit together when it comes to a navy. They want to be recognized. They have a nouveau riche population. But the problem is they have a very small middle class. It's a couple of really rich people and a whole shitload of poor people and a very small middle class. Now, as time goes on, that's going to change for sure. There's going to be more rich people and there's going to be a big middle class. But for now, they're what you would call an emerging superpower. They will become a factor in the next century for sure, because they just sheer number of people, plus the fact that they are now the next go-to for outsourced labor. Because let's be honest, the world needs to smarten the fuck up and take all their labor out of China, all of it. That's the only way you're gonna stop them, because we created this monster, the world. We created.
And yet
them.
we're still supporting it.
Yes, because it's a source of cheap labor. Because now people are like, well, we can move it to India, but think of how much it's going to cost for us to cancel our contracts here and logistically move all the facilities over there. And it's like, shut the fuck up and think of the bigger picture here. Because you've created a monster by empowering it with billions. And they stole your creative rights and technologies and designs. And now they can make their own indigenous designs based off of the evolutions of the stuff they stole from you. They're not stupid people.
They're pretty fucking intelligent, and
it's pretty. You have to be very intelligent to do that.
And it's disturbing what they're doing.
Well, the human rights atrocities, yes.
Apart from that, but I'm saying what they're capable of doing. They can just literally, vice versa, your technology against you.
Yes, that is always a factor. Okay, so you came up with a good scenario, and for your first time, I commend you for it. Next, we're going to do week 3. I haven't figured out the rules for it yet, but if you're available, you should come and do it, because this is what the whole idea of the war game was. The scenario was supposed to be short. The discussion based off the possibilities and facts and figures, like this whole banter we're doing, that was the whole point of this. Because everybody is going to learn something from this, right? It's like, you needed to know about population sizes. You needed to know about logistics. It's like, cool. Well, I know parts about that. Or maybe I didn't know parts about something and you explained it. So that was the whole point of this. Unfortunately, the ultimate chat napper is still asleep. So I guess we don't get to hear him for the 3rd week.
Yep.
What a shame. We're for the 2nd week. So that being said, and surprisingly, we didn't take 3 hours. I guess I'm going to play this. And I'm going to thank you all in the chat for playing along with us. And I think we have determined that World War III just got a little bit more complicated in our little scenario, but it's getting interesting. Anyway, if you're new to my channel, welcome, but if you're a regular here, welcome back. Either way, check out my other playlists and see if my other interests may be of interest to you. I did see you, the finest of apes. I'm glad you came. I am working on a new video project for next week, hopefully in a 5-part series. Hopefully you'll like it, because it's a lot less serious and a little bit more fun. So, this was the War Room. This was day 380. We'll be back in a week for day 387 for the war that nobody asked for. So until then, Slava Ukraini.
Not very Ukraine.
And good night. Apparently Mikey fell asleep too.
Mike.
It's okay. It's been a long day.